Hi guys, so after having read the readings for this week and watching the video, I have come up with 3 topics to kind of address, those being socialization, unconscious attitudes and biases, and privileges. So starting with socialization, I see socialization in this sense as how we've socialized white superiority, which was something that was brought up in the video. People have been so overthrown and oppressed by white people over basically our entire history. Native Americans, and in the video mentioned Hawaiians and African Americans when they started out with the woman talking about how she had been introduced to what slavery was by her mother, but she quotes, no one had ever told her that in school about how bad it was and how horribly they had things. And what I think is interesting about all of this is we think that by doing this, we're saving them because they're trying to convert to Christianity and taming like their savage natures, which is going back to the topic of white superiority. We think that they're better and that we need to save them when we know nothing about them. I also liked what they said in the video about schools watering down stories of oppression. I think is really true, especially when talking about Native Americans. It was a lot worse than we know it was, and I think that they have done this for a reason. And also that it kind of goes back from a concept in chapter 1 about knowledge being socially constructed, which I strongly believe, and that was on page 7. We only teach kids what we want them to know and exclude things that are unsavory towards the view of what American culture is. The next topic that I want to talk about is the idea of unconscious attitudes and biases. I want to start out with the example from the video of the adopted woman in the story about when her white adoptive father took her and her black biological father to church. And she said that all of the other people in the church were staring at her, and that was the first time that she had seen herself as black and that other people had kind of seen her as black because of her lighter skin tone. And that has to do with a lot with the different lenses that we use to see people in. So as soon as they labeled her as black, they were looking at her with a different lens than they had before. And I think the page for that, for about the lenses, is on page 20 of the book. And they do this, people do this whether they mean to or not. I also thought that it was an interesting add-on in the video about biases towards Obama. Studies have shown that 75% of white people have negative, unconscious connotations with black people. However, Obama won 45% of the white vote. I think that says a lot about this issue, because we don't really mean to be biased towards people because of their skin tone, but because of the way that we were socialized and all of the unconscious values that we have deep down, we do it anyway, which kind of goes back to chapter 1 about unconscious discrimination. So the last thing I want to talk about is privilege. And privilege can be the way that we categorize and stigmatize people in creating our societal hierarchy. So the people with the privilege are the ones that are in more favorable categories, such as sometimes just being white or being wealthy or being heterosexual, which is something that the woman in the video talked about. Because a lot of the time when we talk about privilege, we think of skin color, but that doesn't always mean that that is why we are privileged. It can be things like being in a certain class, speaking English, and then being heterosexual, because those who aren't those things typically don't have those kind of privileges. And in regard to privilege, success doesn't always mean that you've earned it, but it doesn't mean that you haven't earned it. And I think that a good way to think about it is that opportunity breeds success, and the more opportunities that you have, the more opportunities you have to be successful. And I liked what the woman also said about having to take her blinders off and look at the abuse of power before she can have a conversation about what it really is. And I think that is important in what we can do to fix this kind of a problem. You have to talk about it and take it apart. In chapter 1 on page 7, the author says, awareness of our theoretical maps can lead to fundamental change in our behavior. And I think that, like, coming from a standpoint of changing behavior, a lot of the time when it's deep-rooted, you really have to get to the bottom of it and retrace your steps and where your kind of unconscious thoughts tend to wander, and only then can you really pick it apart and rewire your brain to not think in such discriminative ways, even if it's unconscious. I thought another thing to mention on page 20 was about the job hiring process, and how because of that study with the resumes and the traditionally white and black names, we've put in blockers to eliminate the way that we might discriminate unconsciously due to things like names that sound either white or black, so that job hiring can decrease the stigmatization towards people of different minorities or races or genders, and just kind of make it a more even playing field for everyone.